So then, I want to talk a little bit about Russia and hacking the Democratic National Committee's emails, but not just yet, maybe in a few minutes. Before that, though, Brexit. Don't turn off the radio. Stay where you are. I won't be on it long. I'm starting to get even more annoyed than I get, and I'm a highly strung Irish guy. Genial, generally cordial, generally happy-go-lucky. Anybody who's ever met me, well, not anybody. Most of the people who've met me will tell you I'm a pretty decent, down-to-earth type of guy, but I can lose the rag. I'm starting to get annoyed just a bit. Today on Sky News and on the BBC at different times, there were debates about whether or not there should be another referendum. Seriously, there were. Now on Sky, the reasons argued were that people didn't know what they were voting for. You've heard this one before. That they didn't know they were voting to leave the single market. They didn't know that, apparently. Right? And that those who voted to leave on June 23rd were hoodwinked, were lied to. It's been argued by those who want another referendum that the government is clueless. It is, generally, let's be honest. But they're arguing the government doesn't know what they are doing. They have no negotiation position. They are risking the economic futures of generations to come. It's a mess, say the Remoaners. They say that the government are playing fast and loose with the livelihoods of ordinary men and women like you and me. So, we need a second referendum. 48% can't be ignored, we are told. And it's been suggested today, as I predicted it would be, a broken clock is right twice a day, right? That many who voted to leave have already changed their minds and want their vote back. Staggering. So then, it wasn't clear that we were going to leave the single market. Here's David Cameron, George Osborne, Andrea Leadsom, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. I think they're making it pretty clear that leaving would mean leaving the single market.
The British public would be voting, if we leave, would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
Should we come out the single market?
I think that is almost certainly would be the case, yes.
Do you want us to stay inside the single market, yes or no?
No, we should be outside the single market.
I had Michael Gove in that chair, and I said, after Brexit, will we be in the European single market, yes or no? And he said, no.
And he was right.
So we won't be in the European single market.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality. Britain would be quitting the single market.
Yeah, no ambiguity there. It was pretty clear at the time. Single market was a non-runner. The UK would leave. Now, back in April last year, 2 months before the referendum, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson, explained why the single market doesn't matter a damn.
And one of the big knotty problems we've tried to discuss in this programme is whether or not we would be in a single market after leaving the EU as an institution. What's your view?
It's not important. Fortunately, we live in a largely free trading world. That is due to the way that the world has developed over the past 20, 30 years, and it's due to the efforts of the World Trade Organization. And we live in a pretty free trading world. The common external tariff, the weighted average, as they say,
5%.
It's between 3 and 4%. It's between 3 and 4%. That's the official figures. And that is trivial. The currencies move more than that. What is striking is that trade from outside the European Union into the European Union has risen much faster than trade within the European Union. You don't need to be within the single market to trade. Really. It's not an issue.
It's not an issue. It doesn't matter. Trade into the European Union from countries not in it has risen starkly in the last 2 decades. Trade within the European Union hasn't. It's declining. Now, I said this a lot pre-referendum and post-referendum. Not because I'm some genius. I just did what any, semi-decent journalist should do, and that's research it. And I know I'm boring myself, and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't so serious. I wouldn't be repeating these comments and these points regularly if it wasn't so bloody serious. The UK never increased its trade with EU member states after joining the common market. Imagine that. And that's a fact. And the European Union is not the place where most economic growth is occurring in the world. The EU's share of world GDP, gross domestic product, is actually forecast to go down to 22% in 2025, a decline of 15% since 1973. You often hear Norway and Switzerland mentioned. Why? Well, they're not in the EU for a start, yet they export far more per capita into the European Union than the UK does. So it's bloody obvious to me that being a member of the European Union is not important for a healthy trading relationship with other members. It isn't. Not to mention the fact that the UK's most important trading relationship is with the United States, Switzerland. The UK sells most of its stuff to Ireland. I know Ireland is an EU member state, but Ireland's biggest export market is the UK. Not going to be any problems there. And as for the biggest investor in the UK, that's the United States. So you'd imagine you'd just be keeping, on the good side of, or keeping a good relationship with whatever president happened to be occupying the White House, because they spend more money in Britain, in the UK, than anybody else. Now, repeating these facts regularly, why? Because they are irrefutable. Irrefutable. But every bloody day of the week, I'm sitting down preparing this programme on the deadlines that I'm working on, and I'm getting it ready. I'm watching the news, and they're rolling out Nick Clegg, Tony Blair, Hilary Benn, and many others. And these people are allowed lie pathologically with no challenge coming from a single journalist on any of these points. No presenter is raising any of these issues. These irrefutable facts that the single market is an irrelevancy, totally and utterly redundant. You're going to get sick because you're sick of hearing it. The 26 members export more to the UK than the UK exports to them. So we leave it the way it is, don't we, boys, right? No change. Same as always. Carry on regardless. It would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous. This notion that we have to tread carefully in our Brexit negotiation. We have to secure a good deal. What feckin' deal? What deal? It's insane. There's no need for a deal. Goodbye, Europe. Arrivederci. We don't like your club. We don't like paying billions into it. We don't like our laws being written by bent, corrupt, filthy bureaucrats in Brussels. We don't like being told we can't fish our waters. We don't want to be told how many migrant workers we can take and everything else. So piss off. Now, as we leave, let us just remind you, we'll trade as normal. You really won't want to piss us off, because we will reply in kind, and your car, food and wine industries, to name 3, will kill you. They will kill you. 1.2 million British people living in other EU countries. Around 2.1 million people from EU countries living in the UK. Why is none of this being discussed on these news shows? I'll tell you why. Because there is absolutely no way these tyrants will accept the will of the British people. They have no intention of it. None. And this is why you get this single market garbage. They want to look like they are honouring the referendum vote on the one hand, but on the other hand, to all intents and purposes, they want to stay in the club. Freedom of movement, single market. Brexit means Brexit. What a lie. It doesn't. The European Union was set up because you cannot control and manipulate people when there are dozens of independent sovereign states working in their own interests and in the interests of their people. You can't centralise power when you have individual countries looking out for their own interests. And we've talked at great length before the referendum, not so much since, but before, about how massive German corporations Bayer, Bosch, IG Farben, Hoechst and BASF, and the Americans, IBM, Standard Oil, Ford, General Motors, to name a few, the banks, Prescott Bush and his companies wanted Hitler to win, because a Nazi win meant a single government in Europe. All the easier then to privatise everything. Would have been so much easier. And the European Union is the elite response to the defeat of Hitler. Again, we've talked about this at great length from time to time. It must be repeated. See davidicke.com and use the search bar. All of the articles David has ever published are archived at davidicke.com going back years and years. There's an enormous amount of documentary evidence about what I've just described there. These Rothschild banking cartel puppets, and by puppets I mean the governments of Europe, will never allow the collapse of the Union and will do whatever they think necessary to reverse the decision made by the 52% last June. We live in a fascist dictatorship. It's not just the European Union, which is a fascist dictatorship. Your local council, your town hall. It's a fascist dictatorship. How do you stop them? Well, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to stop them on programmes this year, approaching 19 minutes past the hour. It's been a day of monumental BS. I mean, it really has. You might be aware, you might not, that the US Director of National Intelligence, that's got to be an oxymoron right there. US Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said that Russia definitely hacked the US election. The Russians definitely hacked Clinton campaign emails, and Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the hack. And US Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said he would reveal the motive next week. It's like one of those serial dramas. It's like the end of an old Batman episode. You have to wait till next week to find out what the motive was. Clapper stopped short, though, according to the BBC, of saying that it was an act of war. Here's a snippet of his testimony before the US Senate today.
General Clapper, one of the aspects of this Russian hacking was not just disseminating information that they had exploited from computers, but also the allegations of fake news sites, fake news stories that were propagated. Is that an accurate, or is that one aspect of this problem?
Yes, without getting too far in front of the headlights of our rollout next week to the Congress, this was a multifaceted campaign. So the hacking was only one part of it, and it also entailed classical propaganda, disinformation, fake news.
Does that continue?
Yes.
My God. Now, Julian Assange said this week, as you know, that Russia is not the source of their information. Russia hasn't been sending info to WikiLeaks, said Assange. Now, this guy Clapper said Assange isn't credible. Of course, he would say that. Now, you might know this, you might not know it. If you're following davidicke.com/headlines, you will know it. The FBI, incredibly, never looked at the DNC's servers, that's the Democratic National Committee, never looked at their servers. I'm going to pause while you pick yourself back up off the ground. It's amazing, isn't it? But it's true. Neither the FBI nor anybody else has forensically examined the servers, but the Russians did it. Look, I'm not an idiot. I know that these governments, these countries, I know that the KGB or whatever they're called these days, MI5, MI6, Mossad, CIA, they're all hacking one another. They're all spying on one another. We know this. But the Russians have not hacked the US election. They haven't. Now, Larry Johnson is a retired CIA officer and he's worked at the State Department. This is what he had to tell RT.
It's such a silly, transparent attempt to deflect attention from the real issues. What we know about the NSA and its systems capabilities is that if it was in fact obtained by a Russian government asset, that the NSA would be able to know that very quickly and immediately. It provided absolutely not a shred of evidence that there was in fact a connection between the government of Russia and Julian Assange's outfit right now, who's the one who disseminated those emails.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we know what it's all about. It's all about Syria. The Russian intervention on behalf of the Syrian government in dealing with the Saudi Wahhabi jihadist nutters trained, funded and armed by MI5, Mossad and the CIA. The Russian intervention has put a massive cog or spoke in the wheel of NATO's plans. You know, the outgoing CIA director, even John Brennan, has been crying and whinging, saying that Russia has employed a scorched earth policy in Syria. You might have read that. Go to davidicke.com/headlines. Imagine the goal of a US intelligence officer talking about a country employing a scorched earth policy. What about shock and awe? What about Vietnam? What about everywhere else? Libya, Iraq. There's a full-scale anti-Russia propaganda war being waged by NATO countries, and sadly, though not unexpectedly, it's supported by an all too willing mainstream media. That is why you're listening to this programme and not watching Sky News at 8 or CNN at 3 or whatever the hell else.